I just want to have sex with men.
I love The Flash. I never really had the privilege of reading lots of his ongoing runs. I perused the Johns and Wade run from the 90s and early 2000s. I fell in love with Wally West as a character more through shows like Young Justice and Justice League, and the Justice League Unlimited show when I was a kid. And I grew to love Barry Allen thanks to the Crisis Trilogy, The Flash Rebirth, Blackest Night, the New 52 run, and the CW show. Wally may be the fastest Flash, but Barry has always been my favourite. Now conversely, there's probably nothing in the world that pushes me to scowl faster than League of Legends. I'm not into MOBAs. I tried Dota 2, and I thought it was at best. And the few times I've tried to play League, I've just been frustrated and confused more than anything else. Its fan base is so massive and overwhelming, it's immensely difficult for someone like myself to get into, and it's just such a sweaty game. I honestly, from an outside perspective, I can't understand how people genuinely enjoy this game. And that's fine. It's just not for me. Now I say all of this to give you some understanding of how I feel when I tell you how much I enjoyed Arcane, the Netflix animated League of Legends prequel series released in 2021, and conversely, how disappointed I was in 2023's The Flash, billed as the final triumphant race, for the unofficially titled DCEU. For those familiar with the old Big Talk podcast that I occasionally posted to this channel, you might remember my feelings toward Arcane was surprisingly lukewarm. I praised the series for its technical accomplishments, its stunning visuals and beautiful animation and art style, and its emotional storytelling. However, all of this was, to me at least, less than the sum of its parts. Arcane had the makings to be one of the greatest animated series of its time, spoken of in the same vein as a series such as Avatar: The Last Airbender, BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty if you're retarded. But unfortunately, and similarly to the Avatar sequel series The Legend of Korra, the pieces don't really fit all together quite coherently enough to praise it higher than a soft 7 out of 10. The Flash hurt. Like, oh my god, it hurt. You guys don't understand how much I needed this movie to be good, or at least so bad it'd be funny. But no, instead, The Flash managed to be almost good in every avenue, and just barely fell short in every avenue. Its dodgy CGI looks unfinished and unpolished, yet almost fits into its surroundings. The fight scenes are creative and well thought out in theory, but in practice look rubbery and weightless. The Speed Force effects are awesome as always, but Ezra Miller still runs like a cartoon character trying to walk across an icy lake. For both these pieces of media and many more I haven't mentioned, one sentence comes to mind above all else. You came so close. And I'm lumping these two together because, strangely enough, I feel like the one thing that binds them together and why they each fail to live up to their respective potentials, a reason more severely exemplified in The Flash, but arguably more damning in its minimal impact on the overarching plot of Arcane, that being external lore and nostalgia. Specifically, relying on an audience's outside knowledge of prior source material or extended history of the fictional world before immersing into the text. If you have awesome time on your hands, did I write that? If you have some time on your hands, I'd like to take the time to examine two specific scenes from both The Flash and Arcane that I think best exemplify my point. Those scenes being the worlds collide confrontation with the Dark Flash at the climax of The Flash, which I'll be covering in this video today, and arguably the best scene in all of Arcane Season 1, which I'll be releasing soon after in a second part to this video. That's right, I'm one of those guys. The best scene in this beloved animated show wasn't good enough.
Sausalito, turkey, honey, ham, and salami. Pepperoni, provolone, pastrami.
Now, I do want to make a clarification before I do jump into this. Firstly, this was all just an opinion. I'm more than happy to admit that when I'm mistaken, if someone were to respectfully disagree with me in the comments or share another insight I hadn't considered. However, I'm not a scholar, nor am I writing such an article of objective truth, so I urge you to watch to the end and consider my position as a relative fan of one property and less so of the other before making your judgments. My focus is on discussing how this trend might impact future media after all, not just these two properties. And on another note, I know I'm going to hear the response that Arcane wasn't for me, and respectfully I entirely disagree. Arcane promised and delivered a dark fantasy steampunk adventure about colourful characters engaging in deep character-driven drama. It promised turmoil, complex political intrigue, and interpersonal drama that threatens entire relationships, and in this case, the stability of the world. That's more than perfectly up my alley. It's the perfect kind of television show I look for. So with that being said, it's, I think, understandable for my frustration to be as it is. In the case of The Flash, it's the perfect opportunity for me to speak up. I want more than most things a good Flash movie, and we'll never get that if we just take what we got as good enough, because it wasn't. And of course, if the spoiler warning at the start didn't give it away, and the title didn't give it away, and the thumbnail didn't clue you in, and you're still for some reason under the impression that you might be able to get through this one spoiler free, be serious now. Spoiler warning. Alright, I'll start with The Flash today because I have a lot less to say about it, and it's a scene I've seen much more recently than Arcane, having only seen The Flash a few weeks ago now. Now, The Flash is an entire clusterfuck of a movie propped up entirely by nostalgia bait, and presumably the hopes and prayers of the children of Warner Discovery's executives' children, and their prayers that Christmas won't be cancelled this year. And conversely, it's weighed down by the crushing weight of the PR nightmare that is Ezra Miller's absurd and constantly rising criminal record. As of recording, that thankfully seems to be slowing down now, but as a quick aside, can we just talk about how baffling it is that nobody at DC or Warner Bros. Discovery, or any higher up level, ever came out and just said their actions were wrong and not at all sanctionable? We know you can't just fire them, we know there's more legal drama if you disavow the person, but for God's sake, just the actions being disavowed would be more than enough. But anyway, The Flash culminates in Barry and his younger self racing back through time via the Speed Force, attempting to alter the outcome of the Kryptonian invasion of Earth. Failing to save this Earth's Bruce Wayne, Batman, played by the great Michael Keaton, and Kara Zor-El Supergirl, Sasha Calle, who is criminally underutilized. She was the undisputed best part of the entire movie, best performance, best costume, best look, just the best full stop. Anyway, younger Barry, who we'll be calling Barry 2, attempts countless variations of the same events trying to find a loophole or some unforeseen way to save particularly Kara, the Earth's best defense against General Zod and his army. Along the way, he's stabbed and melted with flakes of shattered Kryptonian metal, his makeshift costume turning more sinister until eventually they're interrupted by a dark spectre that has haunted Barry throughout the entirety of the movie, the Dark Flash. Do you understand what I mean when I say this movie came so fucking close to being good? It's at this point that Dark Flash reveals himself to be another Barry from the future, who has been running for untold years, desperately trying to find some way to save this Earth. Confused yet? Don't worry, it gets worse. The movie even uses this reveal as a means to divert Barry 2's destiny. Seeing where this current path will lead him, he decides instead to make a sacrifice and allow Barry 1 to rewind time once more to stop himself from saving his mother and causing the piss variant Flashpoint knockoff timeline from ever coming to fruition. One more time, confused yet? It's okay, it's confusing, but you get what I'm saying, how this sounds so cool, it's all of it almost so good. Want to know something fun? Not a single part of that was actually worth remembering for any purpose besides the provision of context for my actual problem with the scene. Aren't comic book movies so much fun? Anyway, whilst in the Speed Force, Barry sees around him glimpses into other alternate realities, all of which are presented through different generations of specifically Batman and Superman portrayals, all recreated with garish PlayStation 3 era CGI. We see fun cameos such as the brief glimpse of the 66 Batman universe, weird cameos such as the random appearance of Jay Garrick's Flash from the 40s, or the jarringly lifeless reappearance of Christopher Reeve's Superman and Helen Slater's Supergirl, or even Nicolas Cage showing off the potential climax of his cancelled Tim Burton Superman project, Superman Lives. And even one absolutely abhorrent appearance that genuinely disgusts me to call a cameo appearance in George Reeves, by all accounts wonderful man and actor who on June 16, 1959 tragically ended his own life in large part due to his career prospects and future growth being ruined by being typecast and subsequently trapped in the role of Superman on television and picture serials. The last appearance is especially uncomfortable as an audience member who knows all of this, but not only did DC clearly not have the time or expendable budget to hire the living actors such as Nicolas Cage, Helen Slater, or even Grant Gustin or John Wesley Shipp to play any of their respective roles in this climactic scene regarding DC properties and universes colliding together, and especially Grant Gustin, who arguably did the most work in recent years with the CW Flash series to turn Barry Allen into a household common name. For an audience member who doesn't know all of this, you're just confused. In my theater at least, I went with two friends. One, Edward, or Brudez as you may better know him, link in the top corner there, who was barely knowledgeable in comics through no misdeed other than passive disinterest, and Stuart, who was just in my Roblox video and potentially in my Phasmophobia videos. If I've uploaded those, I may not have. Anyway, he's more knowledgeable on comics and basic stuff through the series, lighter comic reading here and there, and through what I've talked his ear off about in my never-ending quest to turn all of my friends and family into insufferable comic geeks. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Give up. Stop fighting me. For Eddie, the scene garnered no real reaction, bar when I informed him of the George Reeves situation, at which point he seemed more uncomfortable, if not disinterested, and for Stuart, the references were very eh. He was more disappointed, as I was, that no actors who are still alive and could have portrayed these roles were contacted to portray them at all, it seems. There were some quite older couples who seemed confused, a couple teenagers got a good laugh out of the awful CGI, but my mind raced the entire time. This was the big scene of the movie, the one they thought would hook us into the new DCU under Gunn and Safran, with a huge display of past history. Here's where the issues start. Who is nostalgic for most of these properties? And of those people, who is going to go to The Flash expecting that? Keaton was a nostalgia bait casting choice. His inclusion was meant to draw in older audiences who loved the Keaton Batman movies into sitting through this painfully meh cinema experience. Keaton does a fantastic job with the material he's given. It's really nice to see a competent Batman. It seems like it's the first one we've seen since the serial killer we saw in Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice in 2016. But was anyone really roaring for him to come back? The man is 71 years old, and yeah, it's nice to see him, but no one's clamoring for this old man to jump back in the saddle and bring in the new age as our latest Batman again. We've come a long way since Keaton. We have the Nolan movies, we have an underrated Val Kilmer performance, and a performance by George Clooney that's no one's fault, really. Same with Superman, and while it's lovely to see Christopher Reeve again, horrifying as it is, we gotta remember, the guy is dead. They don't have the decency to use archival footage or living actors. They won't even bring Henry Cavill back for a cameo, even recreating him in CGI. Wouldn't it have been nice if we were going to be slammed with the lore dumps and nostalgia baiting to see Cavill soar one last time besides that stupid Black Adam end credit scene? And more importantly to my point, most movie-going audiences don't know any of these people. They don't know who Jay Garrick is. They haven't seen Alan Coulter and Paul Burbaum's Hollywoodland from 2006. And they don't know who the hell George Reeves is. They didn't know there was a Superman before Christopher Reeve. They didn't know Nicolas Cage was supposed to play Superman in what would have been the greatest movie ever made. Warner Brothers, you cowards! They don't know Nicolas Cage is a Superman fan at all. They might look it up now, but all they're gonna feel is frustrated, confused, or worst of all, they probably won't care. And that's what it all boils down to. The Flash hinged its success and its climax on fostering an atmosphere of nostalgic vibes and grand endings, and chose to prop up the foundations for its grand finale with names and characters people either don't know or don't care about, or people they want to know more about, but are giving nothing more to know about. If you know, then potentially it's nice to see, sure, but most people don't. Ultimately, it serves to make The Flash an inaccessible film released into a market where its only hope of standing a chance at the domestic and foreign box offices was accessibility. All they had to do was make a movie about a guy who solves crime and runs fast, and sometimes goes on wacky adventures with other weird freaks. Instead, they chose to do Flashpoint, redo Man of Steel, retcon events within Man of Steel, incorporate the Keaton Batman movies into the canon of the DCU, kind of but not really, make a Reverse Flash, Dark Flash origin story. It's super weird that Reverse Flash isn't in this movie, by the way, given how important he is to Flashpoint. His presence is sorely missed with no adequate substitute. It wants to be an introductory Supergirl film, it wants to be a Batman movie, it wants to be a Flash origin of sorts, and simultaneously be his most important story ever told. It wants to be an alien invasion movie, it wants to pay homage and tribute to the movies of the past, it wants to build the foundations for the future of DC cinema, it wants to be its own unique thing, it wants to be recognizable based off of its source material, it wants to be funny, it wants to be grim and dark, it wants to upset you, it wants to not take itself too seriously, it wants to be the most serious thing you'll ever see in your entire life. It wants to be like an MCU movie. It would beat the ever-loving shit out of you if you ever compare it to a goddamn MCU movie, you son of a bitch. It wants to be all these things at once, and in the end, it all comes down to being only one thing. A mess. An okay superhero movie, at best, that fails to live up to the extremely forced hype surrounding it, to be blown away by the sands of time. And that is so forgettable that I'll never forget it. That's so bland I can't stop thinking about it. It leaves so little to take home to ponder that I'll never not have questions about how this movie came so close to being good and still failed. So thanks guys for watching this one. Like I mentioned, this is just a part 1 where I'm going to be talking about the Flash part of the essay I kind of wrote. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird structure I guess I've chosen to do. I guess I just think that a lot of these have similarities that weirdly correlate with each other, if that makes sense. I think it'll make a lot more sense once the Arcane video is up. I just sort of decided, thanks to some insight from my patron actually, that it'd be better to split this video into 2 parts so that it was a little bit more focused and that people can just watch the part that they're a bit more interested in. So if you care more about the Flash, you can watch the Flash video. If you care about Arcane, you can watch the Arcane video. Yeah, I'm gonna try to get this one out soon-ish and then get the Arcane video out in about like the next couple of weeks afterwards, probably within the week if I can finish that. Shouldn't take too long to finish, I don't think. But on that note, I did want to actually mention the Patreon, I should say. I think that's just an interesting thing that I have started recently. Just a little way for me, I guess, to interact more with my fans, earn a bit of income off the channel if possible. And look, I just want to emphasize that if you don't have the money to donate, I'm not forcing anyone to buy anything. You know, it's not going to be sort of something I'm going to be forcing on people. I'm probably going to promote it more, obviously, because, you know, Patreon, obviously. But yeah, it's sort of like if you are interested in like earlier content, if you're interested in I guess behind the scenes stuff, if you're interested in any of that kind of thing, you know, if you want to see, I guess early uncut videos, maybe some behind the scenes stuff, or show you how I edit things and like do a bit of behind the scenes skits and things I want to do. This goes to both MaxibonHR and Keyboards and Controllers. If you do subscribe to that channel as well, you can have a look at all the shit posts that I post early on if you want. Like I mentioned, I'll do kind of uncut videos of just like the full unedited thing of anytime we play games together or whatever, things like that. If I ever do a podcast, it's going to go up there early. I'm thinking of bringing back Multimedia Madness with Connor at some point, although I do have to sort of find some time to do that. I want to make sure that he is down to do that as well, but that's just sort of something I'm going to have to discuss with him. Yeah, otherwise, you get to suggest content ideas, you can give input to videos before they go live, you can give input on any scripts that I write and stuff. You support me financially, obviously, and I'm thinking of doing a bit more stuff like that. But I guess the main thing that I think a lot of people are going to be more interested in is you get to see your name at the end of the credits of videos that I make, as just like a Patreon section. Yeah, so it's only $1 a month at the point. I think in Australia that's going to be $2 because it goes to American dollars, which can be a bit frustrating. I do understand, and if, like I mentioned, if you don't have the money or if you don't want to do it, that's perfectly fine. Not forcing anybody to. Just, you know, consider it. If you got a spare $2 lying around, why not give it a whirl? With that being said, I do have one patron to thank, and that is William Hopkins. Suggested some edits to the script today, and also suggested I split this into 2 parts. Yeah, thank you very much for your contributions and helping to make this a little easier to manage. With that being said, I'll let the outro play now.